Hello there, Brick Fanatics. First things first, this is very important. This set here, Fountain Garden, is an absolutely beautiful, brilliant set, and if you purchase it, you are going to have a good time. I feel that it's important to say that because there are two kinds of people who come to these reviews. There are people who are looking to decide which Lego sets they spend their hard-earned cash on, and therefore will want a full list of all of a set's pluses and minuses. And then there are also people who come to these videos who have already made their purchase or made their decision and want to know whether or not they were justified. And I want you to know, if you are the kind of person who is looking for validation, that yes, this is a brilliant Lego set, and that anything negative that I say over the course of this review does not reflect negatively on you as a person. It is simply me trying to give a more informed and complete appraisal of the Lego set for anybody who might be on the fence about it. To that end, I do feel like the LEGO Group has done this LEGO set a great disservice in framing it very much as a companion piece to the existing Tranquil Garden LEGO set. Back in 2023, I reviewed this Lego set, Tranquil Garden, and I said at the time that it was basically the perfect Lego set because it does so many things very, very well. It is a nice small package, but it's got a lot of detail. There's so much charm and character to it. It works very well as a companion piece to the botanical collection. It works very well as a companion piece to an art set. It'll work alongside a cityscape or a collection of modular buildings because it has that same scale. It'll work well if you're into Ninjago and you want a slightly more grown-up display of Ninjago characters. Basically, I can't think of anybody who would not have a good time with this Lego set. I really enjoy it. And it seems like I'm not the only person who thinks that, because the LEGO Group has taken this and said, do you know what? Let's do a Gardens of the World collection. And so we get Fountain Garden, which is a riff on a very Mediterranean, Spanish-inspired garden. Now, these are called Fountain Garden and Tranquil Garden, but in practice I think a lot of people are just going to call this Japanese Garden and Spanish Garden. Although the manual does make a point of referencing other places across the Mediterranean that have similar architectural design structures. Indeed, if you go on the LEGO website, you will see a picture of these two sets next to each other. And I feel like that's a bit harsh to the Fountain Garden set because Tranquil Garden is so perfect that it is really difficult to follow on from that. Now, if you watch this video and you think to yourself, I absolutely have to have the Fountain Garden, or indeed the Tranquil Garden, you can do Brick Fanatics a solid by using the affiliate link, which is down in the description, or the QR code that is currently on screen when you make that purchase. They take you straight to the LEGO website. We get a little bit of the percentage of that sale. It doesn't cost you a penny extra, but it helps to keep the lights on at this channel. This is a case where we have here a really good Lego set, which in its own right is a lot of fun to put together, but then it pales in comparison to the almost perfect, if not actually perfect set that came before it. See, where Tranquil Garden is full of just little details, little fun things that pop out to you, inclusions such as the tea set in it, or the lotus flowers, or the fact that there are a pair of slippers by the door, because what kind of a heathen would wear your shoes inside a tea house, or all of the little tiled elements that make up the river and the little printed koi carp. Oh, it's just such a gorgeous set, and there's so many different types of flowers and different types of trees and different flora here, and it's so inventive and clever. And then this one, by comparison, doesn't feel quite as strong because it's very grid-based. You've got these 4 quadrants. There's not quite as much personality to it. It's not sparking with life in the same way as Tranquil Garden. And by all metrics, this is a fabulous set. It's really, really nice. It's just, it's not quite at the same level, and so you put these two next to each other and you do notice that this one is a little bit less inventive. I say that in some ways, especially when you're putting this thing together, this one is very inventive. Indeed, in some cases I think a little bit too inventive. There are points where I feel like the set is over-engineered. There are more complicated building techniques used for the sake of having more complicated building techniques in there. This is not going to be a bad thing for anybody. I personally really enjoyed putting the set together. I feel like for some people it is going to be an absolutely brilliant thing that you get to do something a little bit more complicated and have that aha moment as it all clicks together. But then for other people I feel like this is going to be an accessibility issue where there are some people that I wouldn't recommend this set to, people who are perhaps not as experienced at building Lego, or people who struggle with some build techniques. I feel like this one is overly complicated just for the sake of it, and that's not ideal. The other thing you notice if these two Lego sets are side by side is the fact that this one is noticeably smaller than Tranquil Garden. Now it's got about the same piece count, give or take a couple of dozen elements. I think this one's got just over 1,300 elements, whereas this one's got closer to 1,400, but there's marginal difference in terms of how many actual elements are in the box. The difference is in the size of those elements and how those elements are used. You will notice, for example, that this one is a full 4 studs shorter than Tranquil Garden. It's just a little bit smaller on the table. It's a little bit shallower as well. By all metrics, there's less plastic in the box with this one. And Lego is more than just about piece counts and more than just about weight of Lego sets, but you do notice the difference in size here. The nice thing, by the way, about Lego trees is they can take up an awful lot of space and make a Lego set feel bigger than it is with only a few elements. And that's another thing that I think just works against this one. It's no bad thing that this one is more condensed and everything is more tightly packed, but this one has a little bit more room to spread out, which does feel very Japanese in its design, unless you're thinking about a bonsai tree, of course, which the whole point is to make it as compact as possible. But with this one, it feels like because the elements are more packed in, you get a slightly smaller package, and so it does look a little bit dwarfed by comparison. And again, that's not a bad thing, because if you take this one on its own merit by itself, really nice set. It's just when you put the two next to each other that this one starts to suffer by comparison. That being the case, let's take this one away and put this to one side, and let's focus solely on the new set here and what you're actually getting if you pick up the Fountain Garden set. I really like the colour scheme of this set. I like the white and I like the terracotta. I like the use of tan tiles that have got special printing on them to create all of the floor tiles of this particular garden. There's a little bit of trans blue elements in here, used sparingly for the fountains and the pools, etc. And that sparing use, to a certain degree, makes it feel a little bit more eye-catching, because you're drawn to these elements and you see the water and the movement of it, and it feels alive in that regard. That's probably the thing I think that stands out the most from this set when you see it in person. This is a set, by the way, which you get these every now and then. You can look at a picture of it on your phone with the tiny little screen and you can say, oh, okay, I think I get the gist of that. And then you see it in person and it is so much more dramatic and so much more eye-catching and appealing. And you can see so many more of the details in here. So I do feel like this is one where you don't get the full experience if you are, for example, watching this video on your phone right now. In one way, this set improves upon the Tranquil Garden. It's got the same kind of design structure here where you can remove elements of the landscape and they're in these cool, neat little cubes in order to keep everything nice and neat, and they can just come out and then you can put them wherever you want to go, so you can rearrange the scenery to your heart's content, and that's fantastic. But this one takes it a step further, because in addition to just removing these trees and what have you, you can also remove entire segments of the terrain itself. You can take out all 4 corners of it, which is useful, for example, if you want to change the location of these pillars. And I feel like the big benefit here is being able to move the pillars, so you can decide whether you want a wider display or a narrower display. And that's quite a neat inclusion. It does have the limiting effect of making the whole thing feel a little bit more grid-based, just because all of these things are grid-based. What's more, just because of these designs, there's only so many different ways that you can stack up these 4 quarters. You can't put some of them in some places simply because that's not the way that they're designed to align. Nevertheless, it's a cool feature and one that I think is probably the standout element of this set. One thing that I want to point out though, and this was one of the building techniques that really surprised me, is sometimes it goes a little extra for the sake of it. You've got underneath here the various plates that make up the lower tier of these removable segments. If I just pry this off briefly and give you a little look inside, it's got this very clever, spoiler alert for those who don't like to have building techniques shown off to them, it's got this very clever little system here where you've got some studs not on tops bricks here, and you've got little poles that they then go into a little grill here in order to separate it, and that is how that piece connects on there. And that's very clever, but also I look at it and I think, why was that the necessary way of doing this? Was there not a way that would have used more traditional building techniques that would have been a little bit less complicated? Now, don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed putting the Lego set together in that way. Like, I thought that was the moment of the build where I had this, oh, I see how this is working. That's very clever. And it was quite satisfying to do. But I'm also aware that not everybody is hugely experienced with Lego. These kinds of sets often go out to an audience of people who are maybe just experiencing Lego for the first time as an adult, getting their heads around it. And sometimes a needlessly complicated build technique like that can be alienating to some people. Now, you probably watching this video, that probably doesn't apply to you. You're probably thinking to yourself, I love complicated building techniques, and that's fair enough. But I'm also aware that there are going to be other people out there who are going to try and put this together and are going to be scratching their heads as to why it needed to be this complicated when there would have probably been a more straightforward solution. This isn't me saying that this is a bad thing. This isn't me saying this is a good thing. This is just me saying that this is a thing. I want you to be aware that I really enjoyed that. I just know that other people might not necessarily enjoy it as much. The way that this set then uses some of its pieces does mean that things feel a little bit flimsy in places. I take, for example, these topiary bushes, I think they're supposed to be. They look a little bit low poly, I would describe it, like a video game from 20 years ago where there's lots of hard angles. It's quite square slash rectangular slash cuboidish in its design with a few triangles on there for good measure. And if you look at the set, these are the things that I think have the least detail and feel the most basic in their design. And it surprised me that being the case, that these are among the most flimsy things in this build, where a lot of these parts are not actually anchored to anything else, so they can come off fairly easily. And as somebody who is unable to keep his Lego collection out of the hands of smaller people that live in his house, I'm aware that some of these bushes are going to be the first things to fall off of this, just completely by accident, when my 4-year-old is left unattended in the room with this thing. But of course the set is not designed for that. This is very much a display piece, and you can tell that about it, and I would not recommend this for play. I would kind of recommend Tranquil Garden for play. It's seen a fair amount of play, and it works very well as something that can be a backdrop for all kinds of activities. This one, not so much. This one, really, you want to build it, you want to put it on the shelf, you want to let it gather a layer of dust. You don't want to be picking it up and playing with it and moving too many things around too often, because small parts of it are going to break off. And also, it's got a very unsatisfying rattle to it. These bushes up the sides of the columns, they're not actually anchored at the bottom, they're only hanging from the top, and so they wobble around an awful lot when you move the set, and I do not like it. I'm very sorry, but it makes me uncomfortable. It makes me feel like I'm only 1 or 2 steps away from something snapping off entirely. The biggest offender, though, is the fountain in the middle, because it's got all of these wonderful little jets of water coming out of here, elements that I think we've seen used for various different powers for superheroes in the past. And they're not actually attached to anything. They're just kind of loose. They've been pressed down by a disc element, or a dish element. So they're just squeezed in here, and you're just giving this a hope and a prayer that it actually stays together, because if you are to just kind of flick at it, these are just going to come out. The moment that dish does shift, these are all going to wiggle around, and you suddenly lose the symmetrical design of this that it did take me quite a while to put together. These are some of the negatives of the set. And as said, I'm not saying these to say that this is a bad Lego set in any way. I really enjoy this Lego set. I just want you to be aware going into it of some of the things that you're going to discover as you go through the build. One of the things I really like about the set, for example, are these brilliant cypress trees made out of what I still refer to as Wolverine elements. And then right up top, I always love a piece in a different colour that I've not seen before. This is a dark green Rock Raiders crystal. Oh, that's fabulous. I mean, maybe it wasn't from Rock Raiders initially, but I always think of that as the Rock Raiders crystal. And to get that in dark green of all colours just makes me very happy, because I love seeing something in a new colour for the first time. Hopefully, I'm correct in thinking that that's a new colour for the first time, and that it hasn't turned up somewhere else in dark green before. If that's the case, I apologise for not knowing every single Lego set. But I've got to say, these trees definitely the most fun and the most detailed thing in here in terms of all of the shrubbery that we have. I just think they're very, very clever. I love the use of the elements in here. I will say, and I'm sorry that I've found a nitpick for this as well, but I will say this is the most painful, physically painful thing to put together in the entire set, because you are having to attach a bunch of little Wolverine claws onto a bunch of little blocks and then stack all of those pieces together. And because of that, it does feel like you're stabbing yourself in the finger with Wolverine claws 64 times. It's a minor quibble. It's not something that I would necessarily say counts against the Lego set, but you feel it in your fingertips afterwards. Otherwise, good news for fans of Lego frogs. There is a Lego frog in this set. I also really enjoy this wonderful little yellow bird. It's a colour of bird I have not personally seen before, and it makes me very happy. It's such a small thing, and yet it brings me so much joy to just see a little yellow bird. Oops. Here, this is an indication of how in places it does feel a little bit fragile, because yeah, things do tend to pop off. But since I am here talking about all the elements I enjoy, I love the wonderful printed, it's not a butterfly, it's a moth according to the manual. That's something very nice about the manual for this one. It takes the time to explain to you all of the different plants and all of the different animals, well, some of the different animals that are in here. I don't think it bothers explaining the frog in any detail, but it gives you a little bit more context for what you're building. And as somebody who's not a complete expert in all things botanical, it was nice to have that little bit of insight. I always like when the manual pauses to say, oh, by the way, this is this kind of tree, or this is this kind of flower, or this one is related to the potato, but also to deadly nightshade, so don't eat it. Things like that I quite enjoy. I'm aware that these things have to be done sparingly, because the more English text that is in a manual, the less universal the manuals become. It is the challenge of Lego, is that because manuals are so good at presenting this information completely word-free, when there are words in there, it becomes a bit of a barrier to enjoyment for some people. And so I appreciate the Lego group sneaking those things in there, because it does feel like it is something that adds to my enjoyment of a Lego set, even though I'm aware that for some people it's not necessarily going to be anything more than white noise or gobbledygook on the page. The one other thing that I feel about this set is because of the slightly less detailed base. This one has a base that's very much riffing off of the bonsai tree that came before it, and it is very sturdy, and it's got some very nice little rubber tip bits on the bottom so that it stays very sturdy. This one feels a little bit more flimsy. As I was taking photos of it, I noticed that one side of it was lifting up slightly, and I think that that's where I'd been pulling segments in and out and had just accidentally lifted up one corner of the set, and the bricks hadn't quite been scrunched back into place again. And that's something else that I feel you need to just be aware of. It's not the biggest deal in the world. It is what it is. But ultimately the question is, who is this Lego set for, and in what circumstances would I recommend it over something like, say, the Tranquil Garden? First things first, who is this Lego set for? It's for somebody who loves Spanish or Mediterranean architecture, or all kinds of plants from the Mediterranean, because these are just so lovely. It looks really nice. It's a wonderful recreation of these kinds of things, and I do think that that's very fun and it's very charming. And ultimately, for these kinds of Lego sets, often the first and the biggest audience for something are going to be the people who have a particular connection to that kind of design. If you are somebody who enjoys a lovely Spanish garden, then you are definitely not going to be disappointed by this set. If you are a fan of stately home gardens in general, I think you're going to have a really good time with this one. If you just want something pretty to put on display next to your Tranquil Garden or to your other botanical sets, this is going to work very well. And in those kinds of circumstances, I would recommend this over the Tranquil Garden. In other cases, though, I feel like the Tranquil Garden is a better Lego set. You get a better bang for your buck. There's just a little bit more to it. It feels like there's more going on, including, how long has that been there? Somebody has put a surfboard in the river on the Tranquil Garden. I'm leaving that there. I like that. That's a nice inclusion. But that's a good point. I feel like this set will work for any kind of audience, including a younger audience that just wants to play. A lot of the trees on this one have been moved around at various different times, and things have been relocated as part of a play experience. This one has been played with already, albeit very briefly and under very strict supervision. It was briefly visited by some clones and a battle droid from Star Wars. It works quite well as like a Theed / Naboo Lego set, actually. recently. I'm remembering various different Clone Wars experiences where Naboo came under attack, and this works quite well for that kind of setting. So I'm not going to say that it can't be used for play, but for posing a bunch of clone troopers in here with some battle droids and leaving them to display, I think it's going to work slightly better than if the clone troopers and the battle droids are actively involved in just destroying the scenery. If you are only going to get one of these and you don't have a particular attachment to either Japanese architecture or the more Mediterranean Spanish architecture, which one is a better buy? I feel like it's Tranquil Garden. But beyond that, really, if you like the design of this thing and if you like this kind of aesthetic, then absolutely you're not going to have a bad time with it. I don't think that this is a bad Lego set by any stretch of the imagination. I'm really hammering that home because I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying here. It's just that personally, if I had to pick one of these to put on display, it would be the Tranquil Garden. I feel like there's more to it. Otherwise, this is a really good Lego set. This is fun to put together. It is engaging and challenging and enjoyable. It has some neat stuff going on under the hood. It's a little bit wobbly and a little bit precarious in some places, but that display is absolutely wonderful. The level of presentation is really nice. It is a solid Lego set, and I do recommend it wholeheartedly. Now, as mentioned, if you do feel like purchasing either of these Lego sets, make sure that you do so using the affiliate link or the QR code that is currently on screen. It just helps to keep things going at Brick Fanatics. Otherwise, make sure that you do all of the rest of the YouTube things. We would love to know your thoughts on this set, or indeed on this set, down in the comments below. Make sure that you also give this video a thumbs up and hit subscribe and the notification bell. Make sure that you go to brickfanatics.com for all of your Lego coverage and sign up to our newsletter so that you never miss anything Lego related ever again. Thank you very much for watching and have a lovely day.